All right, welcome to our deep dive into Riverpod. We're going to be taking excerpts from the official documentation and really digging in to see what's got everyone so excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to break it down.
By the end, hopefully, you'll know what it is and why it might be something you want to use for your next Flutter project.
Awesome.
Okay, so you often hear Riverpod described as, and this is a mouthful, a reactive caching and data binding framework.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for us as Flutter developers?
Well, I think the best way to think about it is, Flutter apps, they constantly are juggling state changes, right? They're fetching data, they're handling user input.
Right.
Even as like the theme of the app, Riverpod is kind of this like super organized manager that makes sure that all of those changes are handled predictably. Imagine having a dedicated system that not only keeps your data tidy, but also alerts the relevant parts of your UI whenever something changes.
Okay, that makes sense. But Flutter already has its own ways to manage state, right?
Yeah.
Why do we need Riverpod on top of that?
Right. So Flutter does provide some basic state management tools.
Right.
But, and this is a big but, as your app grows, those basic tools can sometimes start to feel a little bit limited.
Yeah.
Like you might end up with these like nested widgets that are passing data around like a hot potato, which can be a real nightmare when you're trying to track down bugs.
Yeah, I've been there. That's not fun.
Right.
It's not pretty. So is Riverpod basically like a more powerful and streamlined way to handle these kinds of complex scenarios?
It really is. It sort of promotes this more declarative approach, Instead of micromanaging every single state change, Riverpod kind of lets you take a step back and declare what you want your UI to look like based on that current state. And it takes care of all the behind-the-scenes work to make it happen.
Gotcha. So the documentation mentions that Riverpod helps us specifically with common Flutter challenges. Things like handling network requests or dealing with really complex UI patterns. Can you give me like a real-world example of how this plays out in practice?
Sure. So let's say you're building an app that fetches, activity suggestions, fun things to do, like from that board API.
Oh, yeah, the board API. I love that one.
Yeah, it's great. Traditionally, you might have a bunch of nested future builder widgets to handle the loading states, potential errors, and displaying the data. But with Riverpod, you can just define a provider. Think of it as a recipe for how to fetch and manage this data.
Okay.
And then just like easily access it in your UI without all that nested mess.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be helpful.
Yeah.
They even have a code snippet in the docs that shows how to do this with the board API.
Yeah.
I'm noticing this at Riverpod annotation. Is that kind of at the heart of how Riverpod works?
It really is. The @Riverpod annotation is sort of like your signal to Riverpod that you're defining one of these providers. Think of it like setting up a blueprint for how to create and manage this piece of state.
Right.
In this case, fetching data from the board API. But the beauty of it is that Riverpod then handles all the messy details, like actually making the network request, handling those loading states, even caching the results, so you don't have to make the same request over and over again.
It's like having this personal assistant for that specific piece of data, ensuring that it's always up to date and ready to go for my UI.
Exactly.
Oh.
And you'll even notice in that code snippet that they show you how you can just use a simple switch statement to handle those loading and error states right in your UI, keeping everything nice and clean.
Nice. Yeah, that's super handy. All right, so from what you're describing, Riverpod could be a pretty big deal for Flutter development.
Definitely.
I'm definitely curious to dig into these providers a little bit deeper. But before we go full on technical, I think it's worth talking about some of the key benefits that Riverpod brings to the table, especially for developers like you listening in. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think to really appreciate those benefits, we need to connect them back to the challenges that developers often face when building Flutter apps, right?
Of course.
Because Riverpod isn't just about abstract concepts.
Right.
It's about solving real problems and making our lives as developers easier and more enjoyable.
Totally agree. So let's do that. Let's dive into those real-world benefits and see how Riverpod can actually transform the way we approach state management in Flutter.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk benefits. The Riverpod docs highlight a bunch, but I'm guessing there are some that stand out, especially from like a developer's day-to-day perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the most obvious ones is just simplified development. Riverpod really reduces the amount of boilerplate code you need to write for those common state management tasks.
Yeah, less boilerplate is always good.
Right.
More time for the fun stuff. How does that simplification play out, though, when you're dealing with something more complex, like those asynchronous operations we were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where Riverpod really shines. Think about that, that board API example, right?
Yeah.
With a more traditional approach, you might have those like nested future builder widgets.
Right.
And a bunch of conditional logic to handle those loading states and errors. It can get really messy really fast. But Riverpod just streamlines it all, right?
Yeah.
It has this built-in support for asynchronous providers and just makes dealing with things like network requests so much easier.
So it's like it takes all that asynchronous complexity and just hides it away, leaving you with just much cleaner code.
Exactly. And that simplification leads directly into another huge benefit, which is improved maintainability.
Okay.
Imagine you're coming back to your code like months later, or you're working on a huge project with a team. Having that clean structure makes it so much easier to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Makes it easier to debug any issues and also make changes without accidentally breaking things.
That's huge, especially when you're collaborating with others. Speaking of collaboration, though, how does Riverpod handle situations where you have multiple developers working on different parts of the app?
That's where this sort of modular approach that Riverpod encourages really comes in. So each provider is kind of like the self-contained unit, right? It's responsible for managing a specific piece of state. And so that makes it much easier for different developers to work on their own parts of the app without stepping on each other's toes. It also promotes code reuse because you can easily share those providers across different parts of your project or even across different projects altogether.
It's like having a really well-organized toolbox.
Yeah.
Each tool has its own purpose, and so you can just quickly grab what you need and get to work.
That's a great way to put it. And that modularity also extends to testing. Because those providers are isolated, you can test them independently, and that's
Oh, nice.
a big deal.
Testability is, yeah, it can be such a pain sometimes. So knowing that Riverpod makes testing easier, that's a huge plus.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's performance. Riverpod is designed from the ground up to optimize those state updates,
Okay.
Make sure that it's not rebuilding widgets unnecessarily.
So not only is it making our lives easier as developers, but it's also making the app run more smoothly for the user.
That's right, exactly. It's about creating apps that are, well-structured and maintainable, but also performant and just, delightful to use.
All right. All of this sounds amazing. I have to admit, though, I'm still kind of like fuzzy on how it actually achieves this level of, efficiency and performance. Is there something special going on under the hood?
Well, one of the key things is that Riverpod really cleverly leverages reactive programming, right?
Right.
And what that means is that the providers can automatically update themselves and notify any parts of the UI that depend on them whenever that underlying data changes.
So it's like you've got this like network of sensors throughout the app that are constantly like watching for changes.
Exactly.
And they only trigger updates when they absolutely need to.
Exactly. And that's what, prevents those unnecessary rebuilds and keeps your app running super smoothly. But it's not just reactive programming, right?
Okay.
Riverpod also provides this whole set of tools and features that contribute to its overall efficiency. You remember those refactoring tools and the lint rules that we mentioned earlier?
Yeah. The like code stylist and super attentive proofreader. I definitely want to explore those more at some point.
Yeah, they play a really crucial role in maintaining that code quality. So the refactoring tools make it super easy to restructure your code,
Okay.
as your project grows, make sure it stays clean. And the lint rules are like this constant watchdog,
Yeah.
They're catching potential errors and style inconsistencies early on.
That's super helpful, especially like you said on larger projects.
Yeah.
It's like having this built-in quality assurance system.
Exactly. And that focus on quality extends to the way Riverpod handles state access. It's designed to guarantee that whenever you read a provider, you always get a valid value.
Wait, what do you mean always get a valid value? I thought dealing with asynchronous data usually means you have to do all these null checks and worry about, potential errors.
Right. So with those traditional approaches, yeah, you definitely do.
Okay.
But Riverpod has a really clever way of handling this. It ensures that even if, say, the data is still being fetched or there's some kind of error, you'll always get a safe and predictable value back from that provider.
Okay. Can you give me an example of how that works in practice?
Sure. Let's think about the board API again, right?
Mhm.
Remember that code snippet that showed how to read a provider using ref.watch? Well, behind the scenes, Riverpod is doing a lot of work to make sure that even if, say, that network request is still in progress or if there's an error, you're not going to get a null value back that could crash your app.
Right.
Instead, you might get a loading state or an error state, but it's handled gracefully
Okay.
and predictably.
It's like Riverpod has this built-in safety net that's there to catch you before you fall into, the pit of null pointer exceptions.
Exactly. And that safety net not only makes your code more robust, but also simplifies the debugging process, right?
Right.
Because if you encounter some error related to the state, with Riverpod, you can easily trace it back to its source.
Right.
Because the state is all clearly defined.
So it's not just preventing the errors, but also making it easier to actually find them when they do occur.
Exactly. And then to make debugging even better, Riverpod integrates really nicely with Flutter's developer tools.
Oh, yeah.
You can use those tools to, inspect the state of your providers,
Nice.
track the state changes over time, and really pinpoint the source of any issues.
Debugging can be like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes.
Yeah.
So having those tools is a huge help. Speaking of tools, I'm really curious about that full state inspector that's in development for Riverpod. What can you tell me about that?
Oh, the state inspector is going to be amazing.
Okay.
I think it's going to give us even deeper insights into, the state of our application. Imagine being able to visualize that entire state tree. You can see how data flows between different providers, identify those performance bottlenecks.
Wow, it's like having X-ray vision into your app state. That sounds amazing.
It's going to be huge. It just shows the commitment of the Riverpod team to constantly, push the boundaries of what we can do with state management and Flutter.
Okay, so it sounds like Riverpod brings a lot to the table, right? We've got simplified development, improved maintainability, performance, tooling. It's got an answer for just about everything.
It really does. And, while we've gone over a lot of those key benefits, I think the real beauty of Riverpod is that you just have to experience it firsthand, right?
Yeah.
It's when you actually start using it and see how it changes your workflow that it really clicks.
I'm feeling inspired to go write some code now. But before we do that, let's bring it back to our listeners, right?
Right.
Those golden nuggets of wisdom that we promised them.
Let's do it. Let's distill everything down to some key takeaways that our listeners can, walk away with and really remember.
Okay, so we've covered a lot,
Yeah.
from the basic ideas of Riverpod to some of the practical benefits and cool tools it has. But for you listening, what does this all actually mean? How does it all fit together in the real world?
I think if we take a step back and look at the big picture, we're kind of seeing this move towards more declarative UI programming,
Yeah.
It's happening kind of everywhere.
Right.
And Riverpod is a really good example of that trend in action. Remember that analogy we were talking about? Building a house,
Yeah.
telling the architect what you want.
Right.
Riverpod brings that same idea to Flutter.
Yeah, you focus on the what,
Yeah.
what you want your UI to do, and then Riverpod figures out the how.
Hmm.
It's just a much cleaner way to build apps, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. And when you combine that declarative approach with everything else we've talked about, it just makes development so much smoother. The code's cleaner, and in the end, I think both the developers and the users end up happier.
Absolutely. We've seen how Riverpod can simplify all those common tasks, right?
Yeah.
It makes the code easier to maintain, the apps run faster, and it even has those tools to help us catch errors before they become a problem. It's like a Swiss Army knife for state management. Whatever you need to do, Riverpod's got you covered.
And that's a really good point. Riverpod's incredibly versatile.
Yeah.
You could use it for a small personal project, or you could use it to build this huge enterprise-level app,
Right.
It scales with your needs.
So it's not just a framework, right?
Yeah.
It's like a way of thinking about state management that can benefit anyone, no matter how much experience you have.
Yeah. Exactly. And, we've covered a lot in this deep dive, but I think it's important to remember that we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
There's so much more to explore, and I think the more you dig into Riverpod, the more you're going to see just how powerful it really is.
Yeah. The docs are a great place to start, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
It's like a gold mine of information in there. They explain everything in detail. They have tons of code examples. There's even a whole section on best practices and common patterns.
Yeah, it's like having a whole team of experts just guiding you every step of the way.
And don't forget about the Riverpod community, right? There are so many articles and tutorials and open source projects out there that can help you learn and really get the most out of the framework.
The community is amazing. It's so welcoming and supportive. If you ever have a question or if you get stuck on something, chances are someone else has already figured it out and they're happy to help.
Yeah. It's good to know we're not alone in this, right?
Yeah.
We have this whole community of developers who are, just as passionate about this stuff as we are.
It's one of the things that makes working with Riverpod so much fun.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with something to think about. Based on what we talked about today, is there anything in your current project that you think could benefit from Riverpod. Maybe it's some tricky synchronous stuff you're working with. Maybe you've got a part of your code that's just a nightmare to maintain. Or maybe you're just ready to try a new way of building UIs that's more declarative and testable. Whatever it is, I encourage you to dive in, experiment, and see what Riverpod can do for you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And if you're looking for a framework that gives you that confidence and helps you build amazing apps, Riverpod is definitely worth checking out.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Riverpod. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy coding.